I want to introduce, in preparation for Sunday, an extremely useful idea that has helped me so much the last 23 years since I found it. And it's the idea of spiritual psychological transcendence that is not dissociative. And the terminology that I'm going to use for this is transcend and include. The idea of including all of our past selves and that from which we've disidentified as we move forward in the process of insight. Why would I need to introduce this idea, which I have not yet explained? It's that there's I think, pretty universal psychospiritual process of a shift in the identity. In the Buddhist world, it's called stream entry. In a lot of my practice communities, they call it the conveyor belt. My own mind thinks of a rocket ship, and you kind of need to notice the rocket ship, approach it, get inside it, buckle up. There's a whole process, but I kind of at this point need to point out the existence of the rocket ship, of the disidentification process in a way that's not dissociative or gonna screw up your life. And that's because I'm doing more mentoring now. And I think this is at least a 10-year process of stepping onto a kind of natural growth trajectory that sometimes happens on its own, but very often doesn't if nobody showed you the territory or nobody's given you a map at all. The territory is your own. And if I'm going to be mentoring people to become serious Mysore teachers 10 years out, I want to start introducing some of this understanding of psychospiritual transcendence now. And some of you are already experiencing a lot of it all the time without even needing to conceptualize it. And the reason I haven't talked about it thus far is that embedded in this entire conversation is this idea that we are more than matter. And that is a strong philosophical proposition that, to quote Democritus, one of the famous materialists from the Greek tradition, who said, "We are only atoms in the void," the idea that no, actually, we're more than crude matter, to quote Yoda, right? The Yoda said, "Oh no, we're more than crude matter. The luminous beings are we. There's a light inside of each being." And that proposition can be very offensive to those who are committed to the materialist point of view, that actually we are atoms in the void, that human psyche comes down to molecular neurological functions, and we are machines. And I'm putting it in a crude way, but this, when I started teaching 15 years ago, was the regnant point of view in academy, unless you talked to the really smart people in physics who don't believe this at all, or anybody in more advanced math doesn't believe this. But certainly in my world of the social science, sort of not quite science, the proposition of philosophical materialism was not questionable. It was absolutely the paradigm. And so I myself didn't want to be teaching in a way that was cognitively dissonant with the mind space with which many of my students were conducting their lives. Even if, asked to reflect on it, I think most people are like, maybe there's, a lot of actually the world that is subtle, right? And life that can't be reduced to physical matter. But in the meantime, Patanjali tells us that you don't have to believe in anything at all to benefit from yoga. And yoga is science. So to really keep myself in integrity, I've been incredibly careful about this whole embedded notion within so much of yoga philosophy that actually the material physical world is downstream of the subtle and spiritual world. So in Iceland on my retreat time, I started to understand, especially from this framework of mentoring more like serious Mysore teachers down the road, that was a great paradigm. And maintaining silence about this whole half of my practice, which is my sitting meditation practice, has been really appropriate and probably kept the lid on a lot of really embarrassing things that, thank God, I didn't say about the non-material realms in the first 15, 16 years that we've been here. And also for teachers, I feel like I have to go there. And it's not terribly woo material. The proposition that there is inner light, that existence itself is predicated on subtle, non-material realities, can also be taken as an as-if proposition, as they would say in philosophy. Like, just meet me where I'm at in this philosophical framework as if it were the case. Sort of good humor. And I'm going to bring more of that good humor, I think, to my work in trying to also share with you my own perspectives on my own practice in this whole second half of my practice, which is the sitting meditation piece. So Ashtanga yoga, to be incredibly simplifying, and this is my take, I haven't spoken on these things before, so it might come out weird, but also I'll be authentic and just telling you my take on the things. Ashtanga yoga is based in two really important philosophical root traditions. And in fact, this is in a context of, hopefully you've heard the term, the 6 darshans, the Shat darshans, which are the 6 different conflicting and non-conflicting points of view or philosophical schools that Krishnamacharya mastered, which is unheard of for any philosopher in the Indian tradition to be able to hold all of those. One of these 6 points of view is called Sankhya, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. Then there's a whole other world of yoga philosophy called Tantra. And Ashtanga yoga brings these both together because we're basing our work on the Yoga Sutras, which is explicit Sankhya philosophy, and on something called the Hathayogapradipika, which is highly tantric and esoteric. All the esoteric stuff, we kind of keep it under the rug, and it's related to the tantric tradition. So you bring these two together. Sankhya is a tradition of pure transcendence. The teaching is, you are not your body. We are moving beyond identifications with the material world, with our socially constructed roles, and moving into the perspective of spirit, so that we are no longer weighted down by the delusions of the materialistic world. But Samkhya philosophy is actually super, super respectful of the material world, in that it posits that basically half of existence is this crude matter. And the transcendent path is to move consciousness according to this map that bears incredible amounts of truth and is wiser the longer I am with it, towards a perspective on all of reality that is non-materialistic, pure mind, pure consciousness. This is called as the consciousness first philosophy, that all of physical experience emerges from spirit initially. I mean, Hegel said the same thing. So it's not unique to the yogic tradition. And in fact, this kind of dualistic mind-matter perspective shows up universally in spiritual and philosophical traditions, as does the idea of the quote conveyor belt or entering the stream. The idea that once you start to understand the process of disidentifying from small me, from limited roles and identities, there is the possibility of a natural process of an enlarging sense of self. So the contrary view that comes together in Ashtanga Yoga and just makes me so happy, like we are all about resolving the contradictions in this practice, is Tantra. And I would say if the Sankhya tradition is kind of a transcendent upward movement into the continually subtle, Tantra takes physical reality, all that is considered profane, all that is considered mundane, as the field of practice and the field of sanctification. And the body, it's not that I am not the body, it is I am the body, and the body is holy. And it's not that I am not this world and the environment doesn't need me to take care of it. It's like, no, I exist to care for this world, to heal in the most physical possible interpretation, even though the mode of that healing is to infuse spirit, infuse reverence and acceptance into absolutely everything. So Ashtanga contains both of these. And the terminology that I want to introduce comes from a school of thought that just puts language to the way these come together in my own experience and the experiences I'm always watching happen among practitioners who have stepped into the conveyor belt. And that is this terminology of transcend and include. I first encountered it in a book called Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, which was written in 1995 by Ken Wilber. I got my hands on it in the early 2000s. It's a brick, and it's brilliant. And he went on to get really, really weird, though I followed his work closely after I encountered some of this real conceptual integration of exactly these ideas that I'm talking about, the dualism of mind and body, and the explicit, grounded embrace of material nature that we find in Tantra. What Ken Wilber writes about in this book is the process of transcendence as not being dissociative. So the highly anti-materialist language of I am not my body, from this languaging that I think is really true and accurate to what I'm actually seeing going on in a lot of people's process, is that instead of transcending through dissociation, we transcend and include the body, or whatever it is that the identity is sort of unlocking from. So instead of I am not my kapotasana, right? It's I'm not only my kapotasana. That is some small part of my experience. I embody it and give life to it, but also I'm beyond it, which is a lot different from I am not my kapotasana, where you're experiencing this intense physical thing and at the same time training the mind to be like, this is not me, right? So those frameworks are really subtly distinct in the way they impact psychosocial or psycho-spiritual and social development. And I'm going to recommend this idea, this integrated idea of transcend and include, as I start to talk about the transcendent path, which is nothing more than noticing the ways that the mind fixates and identifies. And this is the beginning of the Yoga Sutras that we're just starting to talk about at the Shala. That the first things that Patanjali, back in the Sankhya system, the dualistic system, writes when he's talking about the way that delusion works, is that if vritti swarupyam itaratra, so if the mind has a lot of vritti, a lot of movement in it, then the sense of self holds on to it and thinks that we are the thoughts. That's incredibly wise. We all experience that all of the time. And I think you can't practice the same set of asanas with strong breathing and Trishtana every day without having that insight occur to you naturally. As long as you're held in a container where like spiritual wisdom is present and it's not just seen as a workout. I see this over and over again. And this was a lot of Sharath's teaching, that the wisdom is inside of you and doesn't need to be like ground into a person explicitly. In fact, that can be quite inauthentic and prevent someone from the inner discoveries of self-study. So the reason I want to include this idea now is that I find it so supportive for this phase that comes up a lot on the path, where the disidentification process ignites, maybe on its own. Like, oh, like my biases, my judgments, my roles, all of this is not me. Great. Like having a practice will give rise to that insight. But it's really, really common, and I've been through this, for that to lead to a phase of really intense spiritual bypassing. The best resource on spiritual bypassing that I know is the Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa, who was a complete crazy person and left us with these insights. Maybe Ken Wilber's not different. This is the transcend and include, like finding gems from people who we wouldn't necessarily take as gurus. So I want to have this idea active among us of transcend and include, because I feel like the people on the teaching path, now I'm going to be nudging a little bit more strongly to, not in a cliched way or a religious way or a, yeah, I should know better way, but like in a way that's led from inside. You start to really encounter these universal, absolutely universal spiritual teachings about transcendence. Wow, I can't believe I'm going to send this. Here we go.